Good afternoon, passengers. Welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda, and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 4 from Canberra to Temora, so grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. For engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake set. Switches off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM max. Fuel condition lever cut off. Fuel shut off knob on. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Wing flaps up. No smoking light on. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today is cloudy but warm, and we'll be cruising at an altitude of 8 to 10,000 feet, flying over Tumut and a lot of New South Wales countryside en route. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you packed something interesting. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon light on. Avionics 1 on. Bus volts check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator handle bypass. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on shown. Fuel pressure low not shown. Fuel flow 0. Starter switch to start. Ignition on shown. Oil PSI check. NG stable. Fuel condition lever low idle. Fuel flow check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery amps check. Fuel boost switch normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. Engine start checklist complete. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before taxi checklist. Taxi lights on. Seatbelt light on. Taxi clearance Canberra ground, Martel 04 with information Yankee, request taxi for takeoff, west departure. Taxi to and hold short, runway 17, using taxiway Charlie 4, Charlie, Bravo, cross runway 30, Bravo, cross runway 17, Alpha 1, Martel 04. That is an unusual taxi that we're crossing the active runway. Nav source. Set. Prop RPM minimum. Fuel condition lever low idle. Inertial separator bypass. Parking brake off. Before taxi checklist complete. Position Martel 03. 04. Helps if I remember the call sign while they're giving me weird taxi instructions. Roger, continue taxi Martel 04. Just every so often we have to stop the taxi for something else that may or may not be in the way. Now they told us to cross the active runway and then taxi to and hold short the active runway. I think I'm going to taxi and hold short and just hold short, because I'm not crossing the active runway. And good evening to Rare Bear in the chat. It's nice to have company for the flight. I was just reflecting on the ridiculous taxi instructions that I'm going to cut short, because taxi to and hold short runway 17 using taxiway Charlie 4 Charlie Bravo, cross runway 30 Bravo, cross runway 17 Alpha 1. I could get up to holding short on 17 and instead of crossing the active runway, just hold short on it. And I don't think the slightly buggy ATC in Flight Sim will actually be that worried that I've been so naughty. But they're the ones telling me to cross an active runway without checking for planes holding short. And there we go. Okay, before takeoff checklist, parking brake set, altimeter QNH set, standby flight instruments check, fuel boost switch normal, fuel tank selectors both on, standby alt power on, fuel quantity check, fuel shutoff knob on, anti-ice system not required, inertial separator handle normal, autopilot, altitude set for cruise, check, heading set to, oh god, stupid, heading set for runway heading, and climb speed set to VY, autopilot and bank mode. Autopilot set, transponder on alt, wing flaps, takeoff position, takeoff clearance. Canberra Tower, Martel 04 at runway 17, ready for departure to the west. Cleared for takeoff runway 17, Martel 04. Okay, takeoff clearance check. Strobe on. Landing lights on. Seatbelt light on. Parking brake release. Fuel condition high idle. Prop RPM to max. Ready for takeoff. And set takeoff power. That's a crosswind. Picked up a 15 knot crosswind on takeoff there. That was exciting. And clear of obstacles, flaps up. Canberra Tower, Martel 04, continue for west departure. And autopilot engaged. I think that is the heaviest crosswind takeoff I've done so far. I'm not sure why they had us on 17 and 35 when I think that was actually a light headwind but 15 knot crosswind, and they've got a runway at a good angle compared to that, so I'm not sure what the deal was there. That was a new experience. And now we start to turn towards our navigation lines. And this climb out will take us over central and south Canberra, which luckily we're small enough to not get hit by the noise restrictions. Canberra Tower, frequency change acknowledged, Martel 04. Canberra approach, Martel 04 is type Cessna Caravan, 3 miles southwest of Canberra, climbing in through 4,700 feet. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Walk 0025, Martel 04. Cleared 3 Charlie airspace, Martel 04. And there's Lake Burley Griffin and Civic, and it's all a little bit rocky from the winds there. That's yes, so we've now turned that crosswind into a tailwind, which is making the climb out very interesting for turbulence sake. Nav mode. And you can see that the speed is just bouncing absolutely all over the place as we climb out here. Okay. Cruise climb checklist. Anti-ice system not required. Inertial separator normal. Airspeed 110. Prop RPM to 1900, below 1900. Power lever set, fuel balance check, ITT range, pulling back slightly for better temperature range. There we go. So it's going to be interesting to see how fine-tuning the power goes on cruise, to see how much fuel efficiency we can get out of this plane. And yes, real weather doing interesting things with the ridiculous tailwinds and crosswinds and everything. So certainly more interesting experience than just set it to sunny and still air constantly, because, you know, gives a bit of difference that I'm not expecting. And it looks like we'll be flying at least partially through a bit of cloud and then coming out again. Might actually take us up to 10,000 to be at least on top of this instead of in the middle of it. Which is the lovely thing about VFR, is that I can just pick my altitude. The downside, of course, being that As an unpressurized plane, I can't go too high above the weather. One of the reasons that we get the ridiculous cruise altitudes is that there's less weather when you're above it, with certain weird exceptions. So the general route for today is giving us a slight detour over Tumut as we get into Temora, just to see a bit more of the countryside and do some overflights. And the way that the autopilot gives the 1,000 feet to the assigned altitude is always just slightly nerve-wracking in the, oh, that's an alarm noise, do I need to, oh no, it's just the nearly at altitude noise. Which I suppose is useful, but it's an alarm noise. How's the engine going? 710. And of course, as soon as you say, oh, I'll try to get above those clouds, you discover that there's a few thousand more feet of clouds than you were expecting, which is always the way. But looks like we're getting to cruise. Okay. Seatbelt sign off. Anti-ice not required. Landing lights off. Inertial separator normal. Prop RPM set. Power lever set. Fuel balance check. Temperature check. Cruise checklist complete. So, I think something was being mentioned about reading the engine torque in PSI instead of foot-pounds, which I've not managed to find, and certainly nothing close to 19 PSI. But I am fiddling with the throttle lever to see what it does to my fuel consumption, and looks like by pulling it back about a quarter, it's given me about an extra half hour on the endurance with not much change on the speed. Contact 133.15 Martel 04. Goodbye. Melbourne Centre, Martel 04, it's cruising at 10,000 feet. So we've got about 11 minutes until we get to Tumut, and we get the fascinating difference between the speeds of 125 indicated airspeed, 147 true airspeed, 152 ground speed, which is always fascinating to see how the differences go. And yeah, so fuel flow per pounds per hour is now down below 400, which is nice than sitting at 430, 440. And it looks like we've used about 100 pounds for startup, takeoff into this first 10-15 minutes of the flight. adjusting the fuel settings on board is one of the things I'm going to be experimenting in future flights. And how much fuel do I need to take? How far can I get? How much cargo can I pack into this thing and still have it fly nicely? I'm thinking that the flight from Tumut for the next stream, I will load up to absolutely maximum capacity and just see how it handles. And given that that one is probably going to take us over the Victorian Alps, that's going to be some interesting flights. Last time I went through there, we were getting up to 50 knot winds that were trying to throw me out of the sky. And given that you've got like 7,000 foot minimum altitude around there, it gets interesting when you're doing 140 and then you're stalling within about 2 seconds. That was certainly some weather. And just looking around the hills and endless forests around here. Most of the flights so far have been around the Southern Tablelands and New South Wales South Coast. This one is taking us out into the New South Wales Riverina, which is one of those regional labels that gets used in a lot of places for varying levels of fanciness. In France, it's one of the fancier parts where everything is fashionable. In Australia, it's just one of the inland bits of New South Wales that isn't full desert. Although, you know, some days it's trying its best. And the engine temperature is sitting at like 600, which is lovely when you're trying to keep it down below 740. Fuel flow is fairly stable. And just coming in under 8 minutes to Tumut. And just passing over a waypoint called Manda. That's strangely appropriate. I'll have to remember that that one's out there. And of course, one of the fun things of these cruise portions of the flight is seeing if I can come up with anything interesting to say, or otherwise just rambling. So taking a bit more of a look at our map. So there's Tumut Airport, but there's also just the actual town of Tumut, which I've actually set the navigation point over, just because that seemed a bit of an interesting diversion, make it a more interesting path on the map of all of my flights. There's not really any great reason for the detour other than it seemed interesting at the time. And yes, I am gradually learning about putting the map in the center of the screen if I'm trying to talk about things on the map, instead of here, where you can mostly just see me. I've got a great view of the map on my other screen, because my screen doesn't have my face on it. My face has my face on it instead. One of the things I love about the terrain all through this part of Australia is just you've got varying levels of height and then just really steep erosion valleys where it goes lovely and crinkly and craggly. So you get the weirdest lakes that are just lightning strikes through the hills. The joys of just the various ways that erosion runs around here. And the fact that this map will zoom out to ridiculously... I don't think the map needs to zoom out to 1,000 nautical miles unless you're... Like, if you're that lost, I'm worried for you. If you need the 1,000 nautical mile range on the map, I usually have it at 25 for en route. 1,000 is, I didn't know it goes that far. I don't think it needs to. And as is always the case with these flights, it is exceedingly easy to get heads down into the instruments and just lose track of the notion of looking outside, which is, you know, very sensible for monitoring your plane, not quite so interesting for providing commentary and views. Although, even if I've got my head down in the instruments, it's better views than Flight 3, where the views were black and occasionally bouncy. Visitors from Mars needing the 1,000 nautical mile view. That's an interesting use case, to be sure. I've not encountered that as a potential setup, which it would be an interesting one to try and navigate from based on that level of detail. I'm now slightly worried about that. Squawk 7000, frequency change approved, Martel 04. Finally out of the Melbourne Class C airspace, so no longer having to do all of the radar tracking and everything. It's something that I could certainly request, but now that we're not in that Class C airspace, it all gets so much easier in terms of radios, because the next thing I need to do is just tune at traffic control, I think. And Temora traffic control. And Temora has one of the more interesting restricted flight zones of any that I've seen on the VFR maps for Australia, which is the Temora Aviation Museum's restricted airspace up to 5,000 feet, because they want to be able to do their displays. So, at times, to be set by NOTAMs, there's just no entry into this 5,000 foot block. I don't believe any of those are in place at the moment, but it's a delightful little weirdness of how the Aviation Museum is set up, that that's just one of the things on record of sometimes they get to lock this off and say, no, we're flying Spitfires here today, you can't come. And it looks like we're coming up on Tumut, which will of course be directly below us, so not actually visible out the windows. Temperature's good, fuel is good, fuel balance is good. And yes, every time I set up a flight plan that flies over somewhere, I seem to forget that you can't look out the bottom of the plane, so flying directly over it is one of the least interesting views. You can see the stuff to either side of the town. I'm not sure that their tourist board in Tumut is keen on advertising whatever this mountain is. It's lovely and crinkly though. And here's the turn towards Temora. Looks like that transponder change didn't happen automatically. Usually, when it says to do a transponder change, it just does it automatically for you. Presumably, the co-pilot did it. But that one saying set to 7,000 did not. Interesting. This just shows you how good I am at keeping track of the instruments, apparently. And yes, using exterior views for getting the tourist views would indeed be the flight sim approach to things, but it's less fun if I let myself cheat like that. I mean, the flight sim approach is to start up your engines with Control E, and, you know, we've seen how I feel about doing that. So what I actually need to do is remember to either set my routes properly so that we fly with the interesting thing out the left windows, or just remember to decide to circle them if there's something interesting. Okay, so it looks like we've got another 60 nautical miles, 22 minutes of flying to get to the Temora waypoints. Through the airport listing, see if I can find the one I wanted, but no, it is not showing up on that list yet. And the other thing I'll need to do is decide on what runway I'm coming in by. Looks like they've got our nav for 0523. But we'll see what the wind's doing once we get a bit closer. Speaking of, I think since we're past all of those clouds, take it down to 8,000 again. Set that to 125. It's always fascinating to me that you just get endless flat bits and then occasional crinkly lumps. Not going into rolling hills, not going into tall mountains, just crinkly lumps. The joys of some of the oldest country in the world, because Australia didn't get hit in the last ice age because the glaciers came from the poles and weren't good at crossing oceans. So South America got glaciers, and all of the northern hemisphere got glaciers because they were just the North Pole just goes straight into land, where we've got this lovely big southern ocean to keep us a bit safer from that. So it's been a while since Australia's had any glacial erosion, so you just get crinkly bits. And we're coming up on the new cruising altitude. And there we go. So fuel flow is about 380 pounds an hour. So we've still got 2 hours 17 despite holding just shy of 130 knots. One of the things that learning to keep the fuel more efficient will do is, but doing the longer flights, actually working out how far I can get this thing. One of the things I'd like to do at some point will be, as mentioned on a couple of the previous streams, managing to get this thing from Australia to New Zealand, which will be a challenge, because it's somewhere around the maximum range to get Australia to Lord Howe Island, Lord Howe Island to Norfolk Island, and Norfolk Island to the northern tip of New Zealand, and then probably refueling there before going to any of the major parts of New Zealand. So that would probably be about a 12-hour stream, or 3 4-hour streams if I decided to split it up like that. So at some point, once the channel's grown, it would be fascinating to just spend an entire day flying, land, refuel, probably find a bathroom, take off again. One of the fascinating things with the Cessna Caravan is, of course, the bathroom facilities, which, as you can see, the bathroom facilities are no. On many of the models, you will get what is essentially a camp toilet as a chemical toilet in a slightly fancy box, sometimes with a privacy screen to pull up around it. And yet the notion of doing it as a group flight could be an interesting one, depending on if you mean doing it as multiple planes sticking together, or unless you meant working out some sort of co-pilot situation, which would be an interesting one. It's a sort of thing that will be, once the stream's a bit more established and it's going to be more than 1 or 2 viewers for if I'm going to spend 12 hours flying this plane, it's going to be once there's enough people to watch. And I have no idea what that number will be. Okay, starting to get in towards Temora. So, what are my winds looking like? Winds up here are at 115. And yeah, a multiple aircraft flight could be interesting. I've not done that sort of thing before. And you're working out how to get this wind display on the primary flight display, which is, for those who are unfamiliar with what I was just doing, let's just get that zoomed in a little. So, just to the left of the compass there, we've got, 3 to 5 knot crosswind, 7 to 10 knot tailwind, or a somewhere around 10 to 15 knot overall wind in that angle. Or we can find out that it is at 115, 119. So different ways to get the wind. So if I'm trying to work out what direction the wind is, we have it giving me the total and the direction. But for flying, it's how much of it is a tailwind, how much of it is a crosswind, which is more useful except for when picking runways. But I don't know what the weather in Temora is like. I've not actually worked out if this thing will give me weather reports at Temora. Some of the fancier planes you can get weather reports just from your computer. Some of the larger airports you can get. Ooh, I do not want to hit that button. That is not the right clear button. That is clear a thing from my flight plan, not from my screen. Larger airports you can get the weather report from traffic control. Larger planes you can get weather report from the computer. I have yet to work out how to get weather reports from this computer though. And looking up information on this the real version of these information panels, I have in fact found out what these little blue stripes or the black stripe and blue stripe to the right of the display are. That is in fact an SD card port. Tune ATIS if available. I do not believe Temora has ATIS. Most of these don't. No, looks like it just has a traffic channel. Yes, the larger airports where you can get it, I was in fact referring to the ones that are big enough to have an ATIS channel. But all of these smaller airports around Australia, you have a traffic channel. I love all of these little stickers, and at some point I'm going to have to replace them with things that say something ridiculous. Because, you know, it's me. But, okay, so picking a runway just based on what we've got so far. Let's see here. So if the wind is 118, 05, or let's see what loading the 05 approach will do. I think that will give us at least headwind rather than tailwind, even if it's got a bit of crosswind to it as well. But we'll see how the weather goes as we get closer. I'm going to overfly the airport before coming in on the approach, just because it's unfamiliar and I want to get a sight of things. And luckily with VFR, flying over the airport and then coming back is a thing that you're just allowed and in fact encouraged to do. And so it seems that the theme of today's stream has in fact been me trying to work out what my flight computers will give me in terms of airport information. And at the moment it's looking like, ooh, that says, nope, come back. So we've got that weather radar, traffic map. I can't remember if I turned traffic back on. That would be embarrassing. What else we've got? Airport information. Let's see if this will give me anything interesting about Temora. So we've got the runway options. Ooh, there's a turf runway. And the frequencies, but no weather information from that. But now I know how to pull up the airport information. That's useful. System setup, that is all sensible, except that it doesn't let you change the transition altitude. Flight plan, nearest things. Okay, looks like no weather information for me from this computer. So we've got about 30 miles to the airport, about 8 minutes flight. And as we get in towards Temora, which I don't think I can quite see just yet, but as we get a little bit closer, we'll get a little bit lower and we'll see what the wind's doing. The joys of self-managed flight in rural, unmanaged airspace. And we're now out of the flat with crinkly bits and into the flat with flat bits. The sort of place that makes for good farmland, good sheep grazing, and is just kind of, yep, that's a field, that's a field. For variation, that's a field, but with something else in it. So, you know, we've got a few with plough lines, so clearly people are doing crops. This is all very fascinating. But with the amount of trees through some of these fields, it'd make for good sheep country, because sheep love a bit of shade. So I think that about the 75% mark on my throttles is going to be about the place for cruising, because that's most of the maximum speed, but about 2/3, 3/4 of the fuel usage. And of course, the big addition to my setup this week is that all of these lovely labels on the throttle quadrant, I've now replicated them on my sim throttles beside me. So I've actually got all of these markings, so when I try to set it somewhere, I'll set it to what the markings actually are, instead of just having to remember them or have them as stickers made out of masking tape with Sharpie on them, which was the previous solution. So, I think we just have the town of Temora in sight there. Towns are always a little bit harder to see during the day because they're not glowing. Or if they are, you're somewhere that's annoyed the American military lately. Well, some of these bits of country New South Wales and getting into country South Australia, we've got the bits where the POMs made it glow, but that's not quite the same. Okay. 22 miles to go, 4 minutes. I think it's time for us to get down to the sort of altitude where we can check the weather a little more clearly. So let's try 5,000. Yeah, 5,000. 725. Pull that back to idle. And as we're coming into this, we'll do descent checklist. Anti-ice system not required. Inertial separator normal. Nav source is set. Altimeter QNH set. Landing lights on. Yeah. Make sure we're nice and visible. And just fine-tuning the descent speed based on extra little bit of display stuff that I learned about this afternoon, which is that that little blue curve on the flight path is where it's expecting us to hit the set altitude. So by varying the throttle, I vary the angle that the nose needs to be at to maintain 125 knots, which changes the descent speed. So we're currently dropping at about 800 feet per minute, which in an unpressurized aircraft is more useful because starting to get a bit more turbulence, so seatbelt light on. But unpressurized aircraft maintaining a slightly slower descent speed means that people's ears don't pop. And the thing that I always have to focus on remembering is that once you come out of one of these descents, you have to put the engine back to full, or to cruise, because if you don't, it really doesn't like being at descent idle when it's trying to cruise. But that is definitely the town of Temora. Might be a city, I'm not sure. And there's the alarm noise that says we're within 1,000 feet. And remembering to put back to cruise instead of flight idle is what that noise is for, I'm pretty sure. So what's the wind doing as we're coming down here? 082. That is making runway 05 seem a lot more sensible. Of course, there's no guarantee that the winds 5,000 feet down are going to be anything like what they are up here, but this is the best I can do. Are you doing an ILS landing? Can't see the runway. I am not doing an ILS landing. I will be doing a visual landing with some ILS just to make it a bit easier, but so there's the airport just in front to the left. So I'm overflying the airport first so that I can check everything and check the weather, because as a small country airport, this does not have air traffic control or an ATIS frequency. So I'm checking, does the airport look good, and what is the weather conditions and the wind heading? Because I need to know what the winds are so that I can land into something somewhat closer to a headwind. So, turn towards where the approach starts. Switch it to heading mode. So yes, there's the runway that we'll be coming back to, but just doing an overflight first to double check that everything is set up nicely. Okay. Back at cruising. Oh, that is quite the tailwind. I'm glad I will be facing the other direction to come back to this. What plane am I in? This is a Cessna Grand Caravan EX, which is... it looks almost exactly like one of your standard... the normal Cessna, but it's actually about twice the size. Seats 8 passengers with a cargo pod on the underside of it. I picked this one because it seems like the most fun, a little more fun than, oh, I've got a big jet and I can go anywhere. So with this one, it's much more suited to suited to these flights that are about an hour long. I can do 2, 3, 4 hour flights in it if I set everything up well and have an entire day to burn on the Endeavour. But It also lets me come into airports a lot smaller than this one. I think I can do some bush strips that are down in the 1800 foot lengths if I set up for the landing properly, which those ones are going to be fun because you have almost no room for error. If you've got 150 foot wide runway, then there's a lot to aim for. If it's 1800 feet long and you've got you need every bit of that runway to stop, you have to land on exactly the right spot. So the challenge of that's going to be fun. Okay. And getting set up towards this approach. A little further out just to make sure that we're coming in at a good sort of height. And the next wants to be about 3,800. Yeah, so this is the I've installed a Grand Caravan improvement mod from flightsim.to just to... my biggest problem with the Flight Sim default was actually the nose wheel steering had nowhere near enough authority for me, and it was making taxiing an absolute nightmare. And given that I like a nice neat taxi, it was rather frustrating. And I've had rather a lot of fun designing a custom livery for this, which once we're on the ground I will be showing off again once we do the shutdown. Can't currently look outside the plane because we're flying along at 120, 130 knots, but the brand colour for the Twitch and YouTube channels is in fact the base colour I used for painting the plane. I picked it for the plane first and applied it to the branding second. Just because, you know, having a branding colour is useful because then I don't have to pick colours for everything. I've just got... But I've got the channel colour, I'll just use that. And then the trick is not overusing it. Yeah, the FlightSim.to mod for the Grand Caravan improves a lot of little things and also makes it so that all of the switches, almost all of the switches on the inside are actually functional. So when I'm doing my checklist and say that the no smoking lights are on, the seatbelt lights are on, it's nice being able to actually flick that switch despite it doing nothing to the performance of the aircraft. It also It fixes a whole bunch of little things and adds in all of the switches inside working, which is just a lot of fun for me. And turning towards the approach. Set that to nav when it picks it up. Approach checklist. Seatbelt light on. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel condition lever high idle. Prop RPM max. Wing flaps to approach position. Landing lights on. Inertial separator. Bypass. Brakes off. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Temora and I've switched on seatbelt lights, which means I'd like you to fasten your seatbelts. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. The joys of finding the airport when you're going directly at it, and it is just a vertical tick mark somewhere in the distance. This is why they have big lighting arrays. Okay, it looks like it's picked up the approach path, which is good. In fact, switch that to approach mode. So we've picked up the GPS localizer, and we look to have picked up the glide slope, which is currently above us. And now just keeping a good eye out for where the runway comes up, which I think I can see it. Temora traffic, Martel 0413 miles southwest at 3,800 feet, inbound to land runway 05. And there's the glide slope coming down towards us. So it looks like we picked up the correct glide slope, not one of the reflections. And I'm almost certain that that's the runway in front of us. Of course, on the stream output, the runway will be absolutely tiny. So the RNAV approach, or LNAV RNAV approaches are runways which don't have an ILS beacon but do have essentially a GPS setup where it's been mapped out. So not all of them have it set up, but if it's one of the options that comes up and your plane has a GPS that is capable of it, then it's essentially a virtual ILS without having to actually have these radio beacons, which is a lovely use of the technology. And we can see that the autopilot has in fact captured the glide slope now, and we are just coming in. And nearly at final. So the wind is coming in from mostly ahead of us, so it looks like I picked the right runway for the winds, which is very gratifying. Somewhere around a 20 knot headwind and a 4 knot crosswind. That's much simpler. So how to use the RNAV approaches. At least on the Grand Caravan, when you go into select approach, if it comes up with RNAV GPS 05 LNAV/VNAV, that is the approach that you select for having this GPS virtual glide slope set up. So if it doesn't show up, then it's not set up to have it, which, you know, can be a little bit more tricky to fly, but for those airports that have got it set up. So Temora has 2 runways, only one of which is actually set up for an RNAV approach. It's usually the more major runway if there's more than one and they've only got one set up. It's kind of a halfway position in price between having the beacons and having here's the runway. Temora traffic. Martel 04 is on final, runway 05 to land. Final approach checklist. Seatbelt lights on. Flaps to landing position. Speed reducing. Autopilot staying on just a little longer. And as we come in towards landing, I am reminded of one of the classic maintenance journal entries. Problem: auto land very rough. Solution: auto land not installed on this aircraft. Oh, crosswind is picking up a little bit, up to about 7 knots. That's fine. I will be taking the autopilot off when the 500 foot call comes in, I think. That seems a sensible place to do that. The joys of two of the most significant causes of airplane crashes have been insufficient automation and over-reliance on automation. .50 feet off the ground.
500.
And there's the 500 call. Autopilot off. And most of that crosswind just disappeared briefly and pushed us off course. That was a little rough. Crosswind catching the upwind wing and trying to flip us into the sky. Always fun. Okay, after landing checklist. Flaps up, anti-ice off. Standby alt power off. Okay, let's get this map set so that I can see where we are. There's the taxiway. And that crosswind is trying to push the tail fin around. Landing was slightly heavy, but landing was safe and non-explosive. Any landing you walk away is a good one. Any landing where you can use the plane again is better.
Temora traffic, Martel 04 is clear of the runway.
Okay, strobe light off, landing lights off, taxi lights on. After landing checklist complete. Before taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, seatbelt lights on. That is in bypass. Okay, taxi clearance.
Temora traffic, Martel 04 will be taxiing on runway 1H to reach parking.
Okay. Prop RPM to minimum, fuel condition low idle, parking brake off. Now let's taxi briskly along this. Not that briskly. But if we taxi reasonably briskly along this runway, because it is the only taxiway, and with the flaps up, we don't need to worry about getting airborne again. And this looks like a good exit.
Temora traffic, Martel 04 is clear of runway 18.
Now, I don't actually have that great a mental picture of where things are in Temora, so I will be finding some parking and just enjoying it. Down here looks good. Certainly seems to be where the fuel is. And somebody else is parked here in something sporty and red, which is always a good sign. This truck being parked exactly in my way, less so. Oh well. We're going onto the dirt a little. And there's a golf cart, because of course there's a golf cart. Yeah, I think parking around here will be good. And this thing's ability to turn on the spot is delightful. There we go. Shutdown checklist. Parking brake handle set. Power lever idle. Bleed air heat switch off. Temperature range stable. Prop RPM feather. Inertial separator handle normal. Fuel condition lever cut off. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Canberra to Temora, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny sky bus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Lights. Off. Fuel boost switch. Off. NG. Stable. Below 10%. Check. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. Battery off. Fuel tank selectors both off. Shutdown checklist complete. And here, as promised, here is the lovely exterior of our now empty plane, parked with the general aviation planes in Temora. Unfortunately, I've not downloaded the planes that would give us a realistic view of Temora, where there would be a series of mostly World War II aircraft, including Australian-built things like the Wirraway and Australian-used things like a Spitfire. The Grand Caravan would be an odd sight next to some of those, but I hope you've enjoyed this stream, and I think we will be leaving it there.